Grosse Pointe, Michigan has long held a reputation for incredible mansions, but what if I told you that the biggest and most beautiful estates have all been lost to time? Hi everyone, Ken here. Hit that subscribe button and let's explore the lost Gilded Age mansions of Grosse Pointe. Grosse Pointe, a cluster of suburban communities along Lake St. Clair near Detroit, rose to prominence in the late 19th and early 20th centuries as the preferred enclave for the Motor City's wealthiest families. Initially a summer retreat of modest cottages, by the 1880s, the wealthy elite were building grand year-round estates here. Detroit's industrial tycoons, bankers, and auto barons soon populated the shoreline with opulent mansions, sprawling gardens, and private yacht docks. Improved roads and automobiles made commuting from these lakefront palaces feasible, and Grosse Pointe became synonymous with luxury living for Detroit's elite. Many of these Gilded Age mansions, however, met unfortunate ends, demolished mid-century as tastes changed and maintenance costs soared. Let's take a look at some of the most magnificent lost mansions of Grosse Pointe. We'll start off with the 1918 mansion of John F. Dodge, co-founder of Dodge Brothers Motor Company. His property, dubbed Harbor Hill, spanned 11 acres and was intended to host a 100-room Tudor Revival mansion overlooking Lake St. Clair. Tragically, John passed away in early 1920 during the influenza epidemic before the mansion was completed. His widow Matilda chose not to finish Harbor Hill. Instead, she shifted her focus to building Meadowbrook Hall in Rochester a few years later. In 1940, the unfinished Harbor Hill was demolished and the land was subdivided into the present Harbor Hill neighborhood. Next, we'll head over to Rose Terrace, the residence of Anna Thompson Dodge, widow of automotive pioneer Horace E. Dodge. The Rose Terrace that most remember was actually the second of that name. Anna raised the original 1910 Red House, a Jacobean-style mansion by Albert Kahn, to build a far grander French palace in its place. Construction began in 1931, and Rose Terrace II was designed by famed architect Horace Trumbauer. The 8-acre lakefront estate featured a creamy limestone facade, delicate relief work, and lavish formal gardens, reportedly inspired by Trumbauer's earlier Miramar estate in Newport, only bigger to suit Mrs. Dodge's wishes. Inside, with guidance from art dealer Joseph Devane, Anna Dodge curated an astonishing collection of French antiques, old master paintings, and custom wooden paneling that turned her home into a private museum of French decorative arts. Anna Dodge lived in regal splendor at Rose Terrace until her passing in 1970 at the age of 99. Despite being listed on historic registers, Rose Terrace was demolished in 1976 after no institution could take on its upkeep. Its contents were auctioned and donated, and the property was subdivided for upscale homes. Rose Terrace's brief 40-year existence, followed by its loss, is often lamented as one of America's great architectural tragedies. Truman Handy Newberry, a U.S. Navy secretary and later U.S. Senator from Michigan, was also an automotive investor. He helped finance Packard and was heir to a Detroit industrial fortune. In 1914, Newberry built an estate called Drybrook at 123 Lakeshore Road in Grosse Pointe Farms, an elegant Georgian-style mansion set on a remarkably long, narrow parcel that stretched nearly a mile inland. Designed by the renowned New York architects Trowbridge and Ackerman, Drybrook earned acclaim as one of the 12 best country homes in America in a 1916 survey. The red brick and limestone mansion featured a grand 2-story entrance hall and a lakeside facade with an unbroken 300-foot lawn sloping to the water. Many principal rooms, like the dining room, library, breakfast room, and loggia, faced the lake to maximize views. Interiors were executed in the finest materials: butternut wood paneling in the halls and dining room, Italian walnut in the loggia, mahogany in the library, and even California redwood in the office. Notably, a spacious music room departed from the strict Georgian style, boasting an Italian Renaissance flavor with carved beams painted by artist Faustino Sampietro, creating acoustics and ambience ideal for Newberry's built-in pipe organ. Truman Newberry lived at Drybrook until his passing in 1945. Afterward, the enormous estate proved difficult to sell intact, with prospective buyers balking at the maintenance of the mile-long property. By the early 1950s, Drybrook was demolished and the land was subdivided, ending the reign of one of Grosse Pointe's finest mansions. Today, only street names and a few surviving elm trees hint at the grandeur that was Drybrook. Alvan Macauley, president of Packard Motor Car Company during its golden years, built a stately manor at 735 Lakeshore Road that was among the last great Grosse Pointe estates of the pre-Depression era. Completed in 1930, the Macauley mansion was designed by architect Albert Kahn, who also created the nearby Edsel Ford estate. Kahn gave Macaulay's home a similar English Cotswold Tudor character. The exterior was constructed of rustic stone with steep gables and leaded glass windows, evoking an English country manner. In fact, the Macaulays were so fond of Tudor and Cotswold styles that they spent weeks in the English countryside studying architecture and purchasing antique furniture before building. Kahn's design for Macaulay was slightly less grand in scale than the Ford house, but no less exquisite in craftsmanship. A master stonemason from England supervised the stonework, and New York's Hayden Company executed intricate wood-carved interiors, including a monumental 45 by 25 foot Great Hall with carved medieval-style linen-fold paneling and a beam ceiling. Alvan Macaulay died in 1952, and a few years later, his widow sold the property to financier Alfred R. Glancy, one-time owner of the Empire State Building. The Macaulay mansion was ultimately demolished in 1974, and its 80-acre grounds were subdivided into a residential court, a fate common to many Grosse Pointe estates by the mid-20th century. Dexter M. Ferry Jr. was the son of a seed industry magnate. His father founded D.M. Ferry and Company, once the world's largest seed company. In 1915, Ferry Jr. completed a magnificent estate at 17100 East Jefferson on a large lakefront parcel. He named the property Stratford, and it became one of the first year-round mansions in that section of Grosse Pointe. The New York firm Trowbridge and Ackerman designed Ferry's house in an early English Renaissance style to take full advantage of the lake views. The mansion's exterior was a light gray stucco accented with limestone trim and topped by a red tile roof, presenting a stately yet warm appearance. Inside, rich wood paneling, butternut with a gray-brown finish, graced most first-floor rooms, giving an atmosphere of understated elegance. The grounds were reported to be equally remarkable. William Pitkin Jr., a noted landscape architect, planted rows of elm trees along a sweeping drive and preserved ancient elms and maples on the vast back lawn. Famed landscape designer Ellen Biddle Shipman was later engaged to enhance a side garden, adding her signature lush plantings. Dexter Ferry Jr., a Columbia-educated civic leader who served on museum boards and even in the state legislature, lived here until his passing in 1959. The mansion was demolished shortly after, making Ferry's estate one of the first grand homes in that area to be replaced by a modern subdivision, today aptly named Stratford Place. David Charles Whitney, son of lumber baron David Whitney Jr., built a splendid summer residence called Ridgemont at 237 Lakeshore Road in 1902. The Whitneys were among Detroit's wealthiest families, and David C. Whitney, a banker and real estate investor, spared no expense in crafting an elegant retreat along the Grosse Pointe lakeshore. Designed by architect Walter McFarlane, the mansion at Ridgemont was executed in a classical Georgian style that drew admiration for its purity and formality. The house was a stately white clapboard structure featuring a two-story portico with towering columns and a triangular pediment. Inside, Ridgemont was arranged for summer comfort, with airy halls and rooms oriented to capture lake breezes. David C. Whitney used Ridgemont as a seasonal escape from the family's famous Woodward Avenue mansion, now the Whitney Restaurant in Detroit. Unfortunately, Ridgemont became one of the first victims of the post-war teardown trend. It was razed in 1954 as the grand estates of old gave way to smaller subdivision plots. The Whitney Estates subdivision set a precedent, and within a few years, the neighboring mansions were also slated for redevelopment. Today, the Whitney name lives on at Grosse Pointe only in historical records. Ridgemont's majestic portico and lawns are long vanished, replaced by newer homes since the mid-1950s. Joseph H. Berry holds the distinction of being one of Grosse Pointe's earliest year-round estate owners. A self-made industrialist who co-founded Berry Brothers Company, a leading varnish and paint manufacturer. Berry established his estate Edgemere in 1882 on a 15-acre tract at 50 Lakeshore Drive. At a time when Grosse Pointe was mostly summer cottages, Berry's move to build a permanent mansion marked a turning point for the community. Edgemere was designed by the distinguished Detroit firm Mason and Rice. The house was constructed of pressed brick and cut stone, featuring the dark masonry, irregular roof lines, and detailed brickwork characteristic of Mason and Rice's late Victorian designs. Berry surrounded his home with extensive formal gardens, greenhouses, lagoons, fruit orchards, and rare specimen trees, a wonderland he often opened to the public on Sunday afternoons. Joseph Ferry's prominence in Detroit and his civic contributions made him a respected figure. When he died in 1907, his estate was reportedly the largest in Wayne County ever probated up to that time, and it was said he owned more property than any other Michigander of his era. Edgemere survived the family for decades, but eventually succumbed to progress. It was demolished in 1941, and the land was subdivided soon after. Many of Barry's lovingly planted trees still grace the neighborhood, and the street name Edgemere commemorates the grand estate that once dominated the shoreline. Hugo Scherer was a prolific Detroit businessman, president of multiple companies, a real estate developer, and son-in-law of the wealthy Schmidt family. In 1898, Scherer had architect Louis Kamper design a spectacular residence at what was then 195 Lakeshore Drive. This mansion, which occupied the site where Higbee Place is now, was one of the earliest and grandest on Lakeshore. Louis Kamper, known for his exuberant Beaux-Arts hotels and homes, gave the Scherer house a distinctive style. The massive, white clapboard house boasted lofty verandas and curving bay windows, while lavish Baroque details added an element of Victorian-era grandeur. The Scherers originally used the home as a summer estate, spending only warm months there. But after World War I, the family began using the Grosse Pointe house year-round, as improved roads made commuting easier. Hugo Scherer was a major real estate holder. He owned dozens of properties in Detroit and co-developed a section of Grosse Pointe nicknamed the Cabbage Patch into upscale housing in the early 1900s. Scherer passed away in 1923, and his widow Clara continued to own the Lakeshore house for some years thereafter. Ultimately, the Scherer mansion was demolished in 1984, one of the last of the truly old Grosse Pointe summer palaces to fall. The surrounding landscape became part of a new subdivision. Higbee Place now occupies the site, its name perhaps honoring another local figure, but it stands on the ground once graced by Hugo Scherer's grand abode. Stonehurst was the colossal 40-room mansion of Joseph B. Schlotman and his wife, Stella Ford Schlotman, and it ranked among the most extravagant homes ever built in Grosse Pointe. Stella Ford was one of 4 Ford siblings, unrelated to the Carr family, but heirs to John B. Ford, founder of Pittsburgh Plate Glass. The family all built estates along Lakeshore Road, and Stonehurst was perhaps the grandest of them. In 1914, after returning from a 3-month European honeymoon, the Schlotmans began construction of the mansion on a 30-acre lakeside site flanked by Stella's siblings' properties. They hired Pittsburgh architect Albert H. Spar, who had already built 2 mansions for the Ford family, to design an early English Renaissance manor of immense scale and luxury. Completed in 1917 at an estimated cost of $2 million, an astounding sum then, Stonehurst stood about 500 feet back from the shoreline, with a circular drive leading to a grand entrance on the landward side. Visitors arriving under a glass-roof porte-cochere would pass through a wrought iron door and ascend a dual marble staircase into a breathtaking hall, adorned with carved oak paneling and ornate ceilings. Off the central gallery were a series of sumptuous spaces, a formal dining room and a chinoiserie-themed breakfast room on one side, and on the other side, a rich oak-paneled library, and a magnificent imported 18th century English music room, complete with an antique organ. The extensive grounds reportedly included terraced formal gardens, a pond, a complex of greenhouses, a 7-car garage, and separate houses for the head gardener and chauffeur. In the years following its completion, Stonehurst became a social hub. Stella, known as one of the grand dames of Grosse Pointe society, hosted countless parties, charity events, and debutante balls in its glamorous rooms. Joseph Schlotman passed away in 1951, but Stella continued to live at Stonehurst and entertain lavishly into her 90s. Finally, in January 1974, Stella passed at the age of 95, and the fate of Stonehurst was sealed. That year, a last fundraiser gala was held at the empty mansion. Then its priceless fixtures and architectural elements were auctioned off in April 1974. Stonehurst was demolished later in 1974, and the once 30-acre estate, but then reduced to about 10 acres, was subdivided into over 20 residential lots. Today, a street named Stonehurst Lane runs through what was the heart of the estate, and like the other Ford sibling homes, Stonehurst lives on only in street names, a majestic chapter of Grosse Pointe's Gilded Age now preserved in memory. Another of the Ford siblings, Nell Ford Torrey, and her husband, Dr. Henry Norton Torrey, built a striking mansion known as Clairview at 575 Lakeshore Road. Completed in 1915, Clairview was an imposing Beaux-Arts house designed by John M. Scott, an English-born architect who was actually Albert Kahn's first employer. The Tory mansion's name, Clairview, aptly described its setting. The estate commanded a clear view of Lake St. Clair and was one of the most spectacular along Grosse Pointe's lakefront. Nell Tory, like her sister, was an heiress of the Pittsburgh plate glass fortune, and she brought significant resources to creating this showplace. The house was an elegant, limestone-clad villa with refined classical details. The interior was designed for grand entertaining. In 1916, Dr. Tory hosted a medical convention at Clairview with 1,200 guests, indicating the home's expansive entertaining areas. The Torys lived at Clairview roughly half the year, spending winters in Georgia. After Dr. Tory's death in 1945 and Nell's in 1958, the estate remained in the family until their son's passing that same year. By then, the vacant mansion became vulnerable. An auction of its contents was held in May 1959, and tragically, in 1960, vandals broke in and set a fire. The blaze destroyed Clairview's roof and gutted the interior. What remained of the house was deemed unsalvageable, and it was demolished later in 1960, bringing Clairview's era to an abrupt end. The once sprawling Tory estate was subsequently subdivided, and today, a quiet residential lane occupies its footprint. Fairholme was the Grosse Pointe Shores estate of Elmer D. Speck and his wife Hetty Ford Speck, another of the Ford glass heirs. Built in 1914 on land adjacent to her siblings' properties, Fairholme was designed by architect Albert H. Spar, the same Pittsburgh-based architect who later designed Stonehurst. In contrast to Stonehurst's Renaissance styling, Fairholme was a picturesque Tudor Revival mansion, featuring half-timbered upper floors, brick and stone lower walls, and steep gabled roofs in the fashion of an English Cotswold manor. Hetty and Elmer's estate included carefully tended gardens and presumably shared the splendid backdrop of Lake St. Clair that all the Ford siblings enjoyed. The Ford siblings' four estates were side by side along the lake, truly a familial compound of mansions. Fairholme stood for only a few decades. By the post-World War II era, the Speck family had moved on and the property became susceptible to redevelopment pressure. Fairholme was demolished in 1952, an early casualty of the wave that would claim most of the Ford siblings' mansions. Today, modern homes fill the site, and a street name, Fairholme Place, echoes the memory of the Speck's Tudor manor. Henry Dusenberry Sheldon, a Detroit industrialist and real estate investor, created one of Grosse Pointe's largest estates, Deeplands, around 1911. Sheldon was married to Carolyn Alger, daughter of General Russell A. Alger, a former Michigan governor and U.S. Secretary of War. They acquired an enormous 80-acre tract at 525 Lakeshore Drive, extending nearly a mile and a half inland, and built an opulent mansion deep within the property, hence the name Deeplands, as the house sat far back from the lake amid dense woods. Chicago architect Arthur Hunn was commissioned to design the mansion in an Italian villa style, a departure from the Tudor and colonial modes prevalent in Grosse Pointe. Inside, Henry and Carolyn Sheldon's home was a showplace of luxury. A marble column foyer led to a grand corridor. Off this hall were rich spaces like a Louis XVI style music room in pale gray, a vast living room in bronze and yellow tones, and a library filled with family portraits and hunting trophies. Henry died at home in 1941, and the magnificent estate did not long survive him. With the heirs not requiring such an immense property, Deeplands was razed in 1947, and the land was subdivided into a new neighborhood now known as the Deeplands subdivision. Frank P. Chesebro was a prosperous lumber baron who chose Grosse Pointe Farms for his home, commissioning a mansion at 273 Lakeshore Road in 1908. Designed by architect John C. Stahl, the Chesebro residence was a large, handsome structure, one of the few Grosse Pointe works by Stahl, who was better known for churches and schools in Detroit. It was situated on Lakeshore between the estates of automotive executive Henry B. Joy and banker David Whitney, forming part of a particularly opulent stretch of shoreline. Inside, a grand hall welcomed visitors beneath a series of broad archways, with the scent of fresh flowers plucked daily from the estate's gardens. The library was paneled in dark wood with glass-paned half-height bookcases, with the rest of the house continuing with these luxurious finishes. Starting in the early 1950s, the grand old mansions on that section of Lakeshore fell one by one, and the Chesebro estate was demolished in the early 1960s. This followed the demolition of the Whitney house in 1954 and the Joy mansion in 1959, meaning three neighboring estates built within a decade of each other fell to the wrecking ball like dominoes. Today, the Cheeseboro address corresponds to a quiet residential area with mid to late 20th century homes. Bertram Cecil Whitney was a prominent figure in Detroit's theater and entertainment circles, the son of opera house owner C.J. Whitney and manager of the Detroit Opera House. In 1910, Bertram built a grand residence at 16608 East Jefferson Avenue in Grosse Pointe Park, sometimes referred to as Bancroft Manor. The house was designed by Chittenden and Cotting, a duo of architects famed for elegant homes in Detroit's upscale districts. They gave Bertram Whitney a spacious mansion with a brick facade and classical detailing. The Whitney House on Jefferson was part of a string of estates that lined the avenue in the early 1900s, offering stately living just outside the Detroit city limit. Bert and his family did not hold the property for very long. By 1916, he sold the mansion to Walter B. Carey, president of an insurance and utilities company, who became the next illustrious owner. Through subsequent decades, the house witnessed the changing fortunes of the neighborhood and several renovations. By mid-century, like many of its counterparts, the Whitney residence's usefulness as a single-family mansion waned. In 1951, it was razed, one of several Grosse Pointe Park mansions to be lost around that time as Jefferson Avenue transitioned to smaller homes and institutions. In the span of roughly 50 years, from the 1880s to the 1930s, Grosse Pointe's lakefront bloomed with the grand estates of Detroit's Gilded Age elite, each showcasing their wealth, taste, and ambitions of its owner. These mansions range from French chateaux and English manors to Georgian plantations and Tudor manors, often designed by the nation's top architects and set amid spectacular gardens. By the mid-20th century, however, the very opulence that created these estates led to their demise. They were expensive to heat, staff, and maintain in a changing era when such lavish living fell out of favor. One by one, the lost mansions of Grosse Pointe were sold off, torn down, and replaced by subdivisions or institutional buildings. Today, only a few survive in unaltered form, while most exist only in archives and in the names of streets or parks. Yet the legacy of this bygone era remains rooted in the community's identity, in street and neighborhood names like Windermere, Rose Terrace, and Deeplands, and in the collective memory of Grosse Pointe as the Gold Coast of Detroit's industrial aristocracy. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. Which of these mansions was your favorite? Let me know down below in the comments section. My goal for this year is to reach 1 million subscribers. If you are among the 1 to 2 million monthly viewers of this channel who are not subscribed, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and let's reach this goal together. As always, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time on This House.